Greetings, Marsh here, and welcome to episode 367 of my modded Factorio playthrough. In this episode, we are going to work on rocket fuel. Enjoy. And we're continuing to do research. It's actually going a lot faster than I was expecting it to, where if we look at our all-time production here, that we're actually up to 1.5 million red science packs, so our upgrades have been quite effective. Every one of these labs is currently going. We could probably get away with even more of them, to be honest, because that's about 7, so we're probably close to 10 or so. And all of these setups have been about as supercharged as they could be and still fit within our logistics. But for now, since research seems to be going okay, we can stick with this. But landfill is taking a long time to fill up because we are maxed out on salt. And one way of going through all that salt is trying out our rocket fuel recipe here. And we are producing a surplus of both hydrogen and chlorine. It seems like we'd only want to have one or the other here. But we definitely don't need nearly as much salt here because we can make a lot of that saline water with hydroplants. And we can use the matrix solver to figure it out. That cuts down the salt to just 2 belts. So ultimately, our rocket fuel recipe here will essentially be salt and wood goes in and rocket fuel comes out. Plus some gases and plus some input ores. But that's pretty cool. Salt and trees turn into rocket ship fuel. By the way, it wasn't that long ago, but we've hit a new record for power output here. 16 gigawatts. And that's power produced. That doesn't come from accumulators. That was steam turbines. Essentially, we were burning propane. We were burning fuel blocks. 234, 235, and plutonium reactors were all turned on at the same time for that little bit of time. So we need to look at the input and the outputs. The gases numbers are so big that these will probably not be able to be put on a bus. So the oxygen is just going to have to be vented. And in fact, we could just calculate that now. I believe it's the player hidden crafting, there we go, to get the void recipes. So they're just going to be vented away. Same with the chlorine. The hydrogen we can burn for a fuel. So we'll do that in a fluid burning heat source. Set it to input. And set the input itself to hydrogen. Let's just see if an 8 would make sense for this. Yeah, kind of. Whatever. The numbers won't be exactly right, but anyway, it'll be burned away. And there's some errors, like we would need more purified water because it's hooked up to this step, but it's not too big a deal. Then it creates some slight saline water, which was required for other things, so it's kind of a little error of the loop there, but that's okay. We need some of the catalysts, and they're probably going to be hooked up to their individual machines. So we need to do the yellow catalyst here. And of course, a single assembler is fine. And then we need to do the green catalyst, and then it gets rid of that weird error there because these are all staying in the same process. And then a couple of ores need to get in there. And the blue catalyst here, same thing, easily done by one machine. And we're going to need a huge amount of red catalysts. We could make it with less machines, but getting that many on a belt might be difficult. So let's just do it with the 4.02 machines. In fact, we probably can do direct insertion here, and that would make it a lot easier. And that gets it down to the base resources. So this is our rocket fuel setup. Where do we start? Well, a lot goes into this, but it essentially has 2 halves. It has the side making the oxidizers and the side making the fuel, and then both of them are combined to actually make the rocket fuel, and that is the part that is huge, with 300 machines and 1.3 gigawatts of power. This whole thing using 1.6 gigawatts, and oh wow, research is done again. Fantastic. Well, we probably should touch on the green belts, because of course we can make them. They're just not particularly impressive anymore, considering they're only 15 items faster. But sure, more useful would be the green inserters, that they're even faster. And of course, we would want the stack versions as well. One other issue is that despite our changes to the logic of cobalt, we are still getting overloaded on the sodium chloride. So what I think that means is we need to change the recipe that we use for tungsten. Luckily, The higher tier of tungsten recipes don't actually create that as a byproduct at all. Where tier 2, the tungsten ore goes in, we get the processed tungsten, we add ammonia, and that gives us the ammonium paratungstate, which is what we need. And now we have a different tungsten recipe that uses nickel to make the powder. And then, of course, we can go straight to tier 3, which is a little weird, but we can make the tungsten pellets, and then the tungsten pellets get ammonia gas to make tungsten oxide, so we will have to take a look at that chain when we're ready. Sure, we'll grab the better sniper turrets, and sure, we'll grab the tank. So we have two halves here. The one in the middle is the big setup, which we can kind of put anywhere, and it's just big, it's not necessarily complicated. And then we have this long chain that essentially starts at sodium hydroxide, makes the solution, makes the hypochlorite, makes the monochloramine gas, makes the hydrazine gas, makes the methylamine gas, makes the dimethylamine gas, makes the dimethylhydrazine gas, and then to the rocket fuel. So this is largely a linear process here with some extra inputs that have to come from the outside. So how about we start with this? And they've all got their modules. So how about we start with the end, and I'm not sure exactly where we would want to put this. I'm thinking it would probably be down here, because it's going to have to be close to the salt, just so we don't have belts going everywhere. And it needs to be relatively close to a train station that we can use. So probably somewhere in this area, but we'll just see what shape it turns into, and then we'll go from there. And I like to go backwards, so the machines at the top are going to be the end point, and also I was upgrading modules here, so we've got thousands of modules that need to be made, basically upgrading all of these electronics assemblers. So what I've been doing to try to keep pollution under control is take a look at pollution and look at what in our factory has been making the pollution. So like you see, electronics assembling machine 3s were bad, and then they kind of dropped down because they're getting modules. And other things were bad, like the crystallizers were bad, centrifuges were bad, ore sorting facilities were bad. And then recently, they've all kind of been knocked down because I'm starting to increase the quality of the machine and their modules, and also make sure pretty much every single machine in the factory has at least one pollution cleaning module in it. That is definitely helping. So now, by far, the biggest polluter is the assembling machine 6s, the green ones. And that makes sense because all of the science-producing machines are completely stacked with productivities, because that is where it matters. So, we might be waiting a while for these to get their modules, but it looks like they got some of them. I guess if we fill them in, then it's fine, and then the robots give us priority. So the gas that gets direct inserted is the dimethylhydrazine, and then we have to pull the hydrazine down from this lower step, which is just from a couple of machines. And let's, how about we line them up on the right here? And actually, let's give this one extra space, which allows us to walk through here. And then we need the two machines making the dimethylamine. And actually, since it's the exact same number of machines, those can't be direct inserted. And then more direct insertion. It's kind of funny to call it direct insertion, but it's pipe insertion. Just going straight through. More water, more stuff. And that makes the methylamine. And now these need methanol gas, which, because we need it in such large quantities, it comes from somewhere else. And the same with the ammonia gas. Now we need to add the hydrazine in here, which is the other component of this top step, and needs about 3 machines. And since all this is lining up pretty well, how about we just kind of line it up with the other side? And maybe with these machines, I guess it'll work out. We'll just have to be careful where we put the pipes. We do kind of need to be careful with how we have this build set up, because it could be something that we might want to copy in the future. I don't want to squish them too close together, but at the same time, I have a great desire to have them all lined up. So unfortunately, because there's no fluid in there, color by fluid doesn't work, but color by system kinda does. At least it shows us that all the colors are lined up properly. So we'll probably want to keep using that. Anyway, both of these steps have an input of monochloramine gas, so it's good that they were lined up here, because then the pipes just work out. Of course, we still need to get it in here somehow, wherever that ends up being. How about we just kind of push this over here for now? There's so many pipes we need to follow to make sure that this is good. The other thing this setup needs is the monochloramine gas. Then we have to figure out where we're going to put these, because I definitely want these to line up here. Well, there'll be less issues with the pipes if we just go straight in like that. So let's do the same there. I think that looks a little better. I have noticed that some of these numbers changed in such a way where if we use different modules, we can get all these down to one machine, so I kind of feel bad about that now. The input numbers must have changed. Oh, I think I know what that was. That was for the rocket, but it didn't include the satellite, which itself requires a little bit. So the total input is 14.08, and that's what it's set to. So that might be where that change happened. There's no reason not to make the setup smaller, especially if it makes it one machine into one machine. Each one of these absolutely makes a difference. Well, it certainly makes the pipes look a lot cleaner. Having those modules in there makes it so we can do direct insertion, which is fantastic, and I'll just space these all the way down here to make them lined up with the other machines, because why not? Okay, we're getting down the list here. Now we need 1.04 machines. Let's line them up on the end. But this one has an input of water, while all of these have an output of water. And the setup as a whole is mostly balanced here. So this water needs to go somewhere. And we don't know exactly how everything's going to be set up, but we can use a tank here. And it's not going to be too much water, so we'll do a non-return valve here. Basically, any water that is produced in this setup will get stuck in this tank, specifically so these liquefiers will have access to it. And it looks like I put them a little close compared to what I've done before, so nice and square, but also not super close. Okay, well then this will just have essentially two belts, or maybe one of the green belts, to come in here from somewhere. Research did complete on those green belts, so we should probably make them, because they will cut down the number of belts that are going into this setup by a little bit. Of course, we get to spaghetti it in here one more time. And there we go. And I'm choosing to use this with belts rather than with bots, just because we make a lot of these items, and it would just be a lot of work for the bots to constantly be moving these between these machines. So, making the items. Of course, we still need to put them somewhere. Okay, that much is working. And I suppose at this point in the factory, we very rarely use yellow belts for anything, so it's probably time to just stop using them. So that's good, but we still need to make the loaders. And I think we have a special loader build here somewhere that's awkwardly making all of these. Yeah, right here. No fiberglass board. I'm assuming it's this station right here. Well, something's going on there. We have no resin, so we'll follow the pipe. It ends. I guess we were just using the resin for the other boards and forgot to connect this. But it should be connected now. Yep. Probably should crank this machine up. There we go. Hopefully the resin holds out, but it's not too big a deal. If it doesn't, just as long as it's enough in the end. One other thing we kind of haven't done yet is this final stage of sorting to get uranium and thorium. It's not particularly useful either way, but our factory actually does use a large amount of uranium, at least when it comes to these ammos, which, hey, looks like it's basically done now. We have more or less gone through it all. I don't think there's any ammo left in any of these machines, well, except in our inventory, I suppose. When this thing is going, it's actually quite difficult for it to keep up. And I set it to have a really high warehouse quantity here, just because when things are slow is an excellent time to get uranium to run, because it has a low priority on the ore bus. So that's going to fill up nice and high, but it looks like the only ammo that's left is what's in our inventory. We don't really fight anymore, so it doesn't really matter, but... and eventually they will finally be done. But it would be nice to configure these crystallizers for the last ores, and it's rather annoying that we have two more we need to add in here. Well, I'm not terribly sure the best way to do this. Probably just to pick everything up, space it out by one. Mainly because making thorium actually is a lot of work. That not only do we have to use these ores and mix it together, but these tier 4 ores of the ore mixtures requires every single ore and tiers 1, 2, and 3 of them. So it's actually a pretty heavy use of our factory's resources. So if we can make a tiny bit of thorium, we probably should. And then this output needs to be the recipe. So it's the one time we actually want the crafting combinator recipes here, because that is what selects what the output is. Okay, I think it's all good here, which means now we've got to connect every wire without messing a single one of them up. And that one connects. And then these two connect. Okay, is it completely broken or did it work? It looks like it worked, because now it is commanding the crystallizers to start making uranium and a tiny bit of thorium every once in a while. Because what it's doing is it's looking at all of the input signals, which are over here, but they're also listed right here, and saying, well, whatever signal's the lowest, make that. And since thorium is the lowest, that's what it's making, and it's going to continue to make it until it's not the lowest anymore. I think most of our machines are here. Oh yeah, we needed the better inserters too. We'll touch that in a second. But one way we can check the output is just to make sure the inputs and outputs make sense. So we don't have the assembling machine in here, but if you look at sodium hydroxide needs to go in there, chlorine needs to go in there, ammonia needs to go in there, hydrogen chloride gas is an output, which is right there, and then this other one is methanol. And it looks like it needs to be connected to this side as well. And then our output is the fuel. So the inputs and the outputs make sense. Okay. Looking good. It's hard to stay on track now that so much is happening in the factory. And it's just constantly busy. But we need those same things. Nitinol, the bearings, the gears. But in an effort to make this simpler, I think I'm just going to make a request for it. It looks like we kind of did the same thing before. Because we just don't use loaders that much, that it's not going to be that big a deal to use some robot logistics for this. And the robots will soon deliver that to us, which means now we just have the inserters to deal with, and it'll probably be something like this again. So time to set this to green. It's not nearly as big of a jump as the other ones are, but nonetheless it is still an improvement, so we'll want to do it, but it matters less and less the higher tier you go. And actually for this we can use buffer chests. Oh wow, so research is done again. Well, we kind of want to slow it down a little bit so we have time to actually do all this, but also we're basically done with the game. We have very little, and I'm kind of rushing through it because we have so much research that's going to go into the spaceship parts that we kind of want to just get to that. So how about let's do some of the incremental research here, just to fill up the queue with stuff that's going to take a long time, like gathering turrets that we don't care about, and follower count that we don't care about. I think this belt is technically the slower one, and then this one needs the more inserters. And there they go. We might as well keep the yellow inserters. They are quite slow, but they remain useful. They do get used, as they are right here, and they're plenty fine, because even a yellow inserter at the end game here basically does potentially 6 items a second if it's going into a chest, which is just fine for a lot of builds. So here's our fastest belt. Let's check to see differences in speed, and we'll put another belt on the bottom to see the belt-to-belt speed, where we get 5.17, and if you can't see it, there is a tiny number when I hover over inserters. That's where I'm getting these inserter speeds from. That it's a tiny 4K number, so if you don't have a 4K screen, it's probably almost impossible for you to read, but it says 5.17 right there, and it will adjust based on whatever the conditions are. So if it's belt to belt, and it's certain belts into certain belts, it will tell you different speeds. So we can kind of check the same thing. Picking up off the ground is the same as picking from a chest, but let's just put some chests here anyway. That the chest-to-chest speed is 6 compared to 5.17. This one is 13.64, and then it's 21.43, and that one's 15.65 and 51.43, because stack inserters are incredibly fast when they're chest-to-chest like this. So if you use slower belts, it slows down the inserters. So now this inserter is only 10 per second, so the faster the inserter, the faster it wants its belts. Feels like not that long ago that these were brand new, but I guess they're old now. But there we go, now the green ones. So it goes from 13.64 to 16.67 and 15.65 to 17.14. So it's not too huge a difference. And certainly chest to chest goes up, like it's 51.43 to 72 and 30 items a second just for the non-stack inserters. So it helps. It's not insanely better than it was. I think just the belts will be the more useful aspect of this. But hey, it's nice to have them now. And finally, we're back to this again. Having those green belts does save us a belt here, where our output is now just one green belt. Okay, the other thing we determined is that we need to do these filters. And the filters go into the hydrazine step. And because we only have 2 machines, it might be a lot easier to do direct insertion rather than having a belt. And that finishes up this aspect of the build. And we probably want to build all of these components separately and then kind of figure out where they go as it makes sense. So the next aspect of this build is the methanol, which comes from trees. So this is the tree aspect of this. I'm curious now. 1, how's the pollution doing? And it's doing okay. There's bad spots, but it's not really making it to the biters, so it's doing pretty good. But also, how many arboretums are out there? Well, that's 25 groups. So we have 25 setups around here making pollution holes and pumping out trees. So the wood is there. So we'd probably want to do some form of direct insertion here. And since we will require 6 machines, if we can direct insert this, it would be a lot easier. So how about we drop this down until it's essentially 3 machines into 6. And then we'll clean them up with the rest of the modules. And where does the methanol go in? On this machine right here. And is anything else in this build using methanol? Well, probably not, because the way that Hellmod works is it goes down the chain. So if you have something making methanol here, and then something requiring methanol down here, it won't link properly. So the fact that methanol is up here on the list tells me that this is the only thing that it goes into. Well, it's going to be 3 groups of machines. And that's the methanol. The next stage here looks like it's breaking up the hydrogen chloride. But we can make it 1 machine with an extra speed module. And we don't need this for anything, so we'll just put it there, and they're going to connect to something, so we'll make it look weird so we remember. And then the next stage here is we have to make the ammonia. The ammonia enters right here, and it's also an input requirement for this stage and that stage. So how about we pick up our new build, line it up, and now that wood is probably going to be coming from up here instead. Okay, let's assume stuff is going to come from above, because then it would kind of line up here, and we're also going to need an enormous amount of room for air filters, which are going to be somewhere. So we'll just put it here for now. It will have a massive input of hydrogen, and that moves the filters. And we actually need a reasonable amount of the input resources for all of these, but actually, per machine, the yellow insert is probably fine. And actually, how about we rotate it to the side? Line it up with these other machines, because we also have 6 of them, and we have input belts right here. So we have the hydrogen and nitrogen that has to come in somewhere, but our output resource is going to be the ammonia. But now I notice a problem here, that the amount of ammonia that we're going to need is well beyond what a single pipe would do. And that is unfortunate, because even this single machine needs 1500 a second, and these ones are also kind of high. Those ones can just barely do it. So I say it's unfortunate because the input requirement and the output requirement is so high that pretty much each one of these machines is going to need its own pipe. Now the rest of these steps are basically fine. It's just specifically the ammonia is the part where the numbers get big. So I'm gonna have to reorient these things to essentially have direct pipes for each machine. And since that's going to take a while, I will be back in a second. Okay, I'm back. It's ducks to the rescue, because they have such a higher throughput. And I figured that would be better than kind of rebuilding all this, because it looks so nice and square that I didn't want to. This is the ammonia input duct, which gets direct piped from each of these machines, because essentially each one of them is combining 1 pump's worth of ammonia. So each one goes directly into the duct and of course gets its red catalyst. It also has a duct of hydrogen, which needs to come from somewhere. And then each one gets a direct pipe from the air separators, because they also run on essentially one pipe's worth of resources. Although you could kind of combine a little bit of these pipes, it's close enough to one where we would want to keep it like that. They don't need to have a nitrogen central pipe, because they can just go straight through, which helps make this smaller. And also I try to design it in such a way where it was possible to walk up and down here. So when you look at this little squiggly, the reason why it's in there is just so it's possible to walk up and down this. Of course, they generate a lot of oxygen, and this is way too much oxygen for this one pipe, because it's going to be 3,600, but it's all essentially getting flared away anyway. So right now they're all interconnected. I'm not sure if it will work properly if they're interconnected like this. They certainly can if they weren't, because it would just be 600 oxygen going through, which the flare stack could get rid of. So in the event that this doesn't work, we can disconnect them and have them go straight through. Some of the setup does need oxygen, but it only needs one pipe's worth of oxygen, so we can just pull it off of essentially two of these machines. But right now I've left them connected just to see if they'll work. And then they get their input from all of these air filters here. And the air filters are bigger than these machines, but it is the correct number. And we can look at Pipe Visualizer to kind of see what's going on, where they are all being connected to each one of their chemical plants, because each one of these itself creates one pipe's worth of oxygen. And then they go into the separators get rid of the oxygen, send the nitrogen through. The nitrogen gets entered here along with some hydrogen, which is going to have to come from somewhere. Then the ammonia goes into its distribution pipe, and then finally goes to where it needs to go. So got that taken care of, but it's in there. The setup's getting bigger and bigger, but that's what happens. So now the other aspect of this is we have to electrolyze saline water, specifically to make the hydrogen that we're going to need, as well as input 3 pipes worth of chlorine to make the sodium hypochlorite. And I did put 3 pipes right here to kind of indicate that this cannot all fit on one pipe. It technically needs 3, or basically a duct. And then of course we're going to have to void away using flare stacks all those resources. Luckily, hydrogen doesn't go into any of these other setups. It's basically all for the ammonia, and the chlorine is for down here, so they're both kind of interconnected. So we'll be able to use ducts for both, and I suppose we can get those ducts set up now, where it would be something like that, and then connected however they're connected. So we have to remember now, pipe limitations. How are we going to do this? First, we're electrolyzing saline water. It's making sodium hydroxide, and it's creating some hydrogen, some chlorine, both of which are going to have to be vented to some degree, because the thing it's running for is the sodium hydroxide and has huge input numbers of saline water. So if each electrolyzer had its own pipe, there wouldn't be pipe limitations for the saline water, which is something to keep in mind. Kind of the same here, like technically 2 salination plants does this, but not for this output it doesn't. And then finally there's hydro plants here, because a salination plant needs purified water. So we have these 14 hydro plants making the purified water to go in there, and also it's mixing in its own saline water. So instead of doing a bunch of crazy duct work again, specifically for this, how about we change the numbers? Because if we drop the speed modules out of here, now it's at 12, and we can do direct insertion / direct piping, where it would be 15 hydro plants joining up with 15 salination plants, putting their input into 15 electrolyzers, and then those electrolyzers would send their chlorine into the ducts and the hydrogen into the ducts as well. That is the idea. So let's do one of them and then figure out where to go. Well, this is all going to be very square, so it's probably going to be somewhere around here, and it's probably going to go up. So let's place this here, and we're going to need 18,000 water divided by 15 machines is 1,200 water, and that's essentially 2 pump jacks. So they would be something like this. So that creates purified water and the saline water. The purified water is solely for the process of making the saline water. We do have a tiny extra amount of purified water that's going to be made elsewhere, right here. So we'll have to figure out what to do with it. But since this is a direct input, it can go straight up. And the only thing it's going to need is a huge input of salt, technically 2 belts. So we need to remember that those belts must exist. something like this. And I suppose we should just put the cleaning modules in there. So looking at this all together, the individual machine's saline water counts is going to be quite low because of the direct insertion. So we don't have to worry about any craziness with ducts, which is kind of the point of what we want to do here. And each one of these is going to require some amount of logic, so they'll all go into tanks. However, we don't want both of these running all of the time because saline water is both a product and a byproduct. So the thing that creates the saline water is the salination plant. So we'll do a top-up valve. So the salination plant will get this up to 80%, leaving room for this plant to put all of its byproducts in there. And the individual machine requires not that many resources. And let's copy this now. Because we're gonna have a lot of these, we probably should mash them all together. And then this one can be a long-handed to pick up off this other belt. But now we have our saline water tanks, which then can get electrolyzed away. And these machines are free to electrolyze as they see fit. Let's put some spaces in here just so we can walk. And then they will have to input their resources into ducts. So let's pick all this up and move it further down so we have room for that. It would be something like this, but let's move them one space closer just to make it smaller, because there is quite a bit of empty space in here. It's really weird to see the ducts being connected like this, but it works. And it might actually be slightly cleaner just to use this space down here for that sodium hydroxide. Now, we can pick the whole thing up, and it will line up right here. We just need to have an absolutely enormous amount of these. And in fact, they could be on both sides, really. But for now, let's see what it looks like doing it this way. Well, it looks like we're going to want them on both sides because this is taking up a lot of space. And that gets the hydrogen hooked up, and we can click this to see that it does look like it's lined up. So the sodium hydroxide was going into that setup there, so we can just bring them in together, and it's actually nice and straight. And we might as well put a balancer in there because these sides are not equally sized. Well, the tricky part, that massive amount of sodium hydroxide and salt, hydrogen, chlorine, it's all in there now. We already have the oxygen gas. Now we need to get rid of the extra chlorine, which there is not going to be very much of. I probably could change the way these numbers work so we didn't waste that tiny bit of chlorine, but our factory already vents plenty of chlorine when we're making sodium hydroxide, so whether we vent it here or somewhere else, it's all the same in the end. Now, we need to deal with that extra hydrogen, and let's check our work here to look for extra items or pipes where we're getting pretty close without having junk that we haven't taken care of yet. So actually, it's looking like we don't have any weird inputs or outputs that are left over, because these are all of the items for this setup. The other one that makes the oxidizer, it's a lot more straightforward. It does require a little bit of ammonia gas, which we could siphon off of this setup, but it's within one pipe's worth, so that's not a problem. And you see it needs some oxygen as well, but it's also one pipe's worth. So clearly, we won't have any issues there. It does make me a little uncomfortable that this is essentially a closed loop when it comes to chlorine, but ultimately the chlorine is the limiting factor, so this has all been sized based on how much chlorine we need. So now the only thing that remains is getting rid of all that hydrogen, and it's just too much to put on the network. So we do have to burn it, and this is going to take a reasonable amount of space. I guess we'll just make 10 of them. It's technically too much, but it's also very, very square. And the pipes all line up. And just like before, it's a 2-to-1 ratio when it comes to the steam turbines. And we can make this a little more compact if we put these on their side. And even more compact if we do something like this. So now we have an idea of how big it is, but we're getting close to having all that research done again. I want to try to take care of all of the non-infinite stuff here. Sure, we'll do the final tier of beacon. It's more OP than everything else, and I probably won't use them, but we'll just throw it on the list. The hydrazine generator sure takes a lot of work to make hydrazine here, but if you actually wanted to burn it for energy, you could out of this generator. And it's actually extremely efficient. You see the efficiency of it is 110.3% for some reason, and only 1 pollution a minute, so it's actually quite good. But I'm not going to go through all the effort of making hydrazine like we are just for power, especially when we have nuclear and especially thorium that we're working on that we really won't need any other sources of power. That's an expensive research, but of course making our drills and pump jacks more efficient is certainly good. And we are starting to run out of things that aren't infinite research. Do we hit the atomic bomb? Well, that's 50,000 research and 2 of everything. I'm gonna save that for last because that's expensive. How about let's just increase our train's brakes to the maximum. Okay. We've gone through the list and taken care of everything, assuming I haven't forgotten anything, with the exception of the oxidizer. But that's gonna have to wait till the next episode. Thanks for watching, and I will see you later.